Paying attention to how cultures are portrayed in stories. Humor me for a moment. I realized because of COVID, we missed some key elements of reading fantasy, and we need to do a quick walkthrough of those elements. And because we didn't get to experience what we needed to with rich discussions, some of this might seem a little bit strange, but it is seriously important. One of the elements we need to do is paying attention to how cultures are portrayed in stories. I wanted to share something that expert readers notice about different books they are reading. They notice, in this case, about dragons and how dragons are depicted differently in different kinds of fantasy novels. Like they notice in some of the books written by authors of Eastern culture descent that dragons were wise and often good, if not particularly friendly. And then in most books they read by authors of Western culture descent, dragons were more evil and cruel. Why? Well, it has to do with culture and how so many fantasy stories seem to be connected to cultures and tradition. Some of them are very old, and some of them are more related to our current world. If you become a history buff and you start researching, you're going to learn that more about Eastern and Western cultures and histories to see if there might be other kind of cultural differences, and not just for dragons. You will learn that was a type of war called the Crusades from 1095 to 1291 that took place in Europe and in parts of what is now known as the Middle East. And any relationship between how dragons were included in stories symbolically, like maybe because Eastern tradition held dragons in high esteem, that Western tradition included them in stories as the enemy, as a way to symbolize their dislike of each other. That's just one example. Today, I want to teach you that the expert fantasy readers not only pay close attention to the cultures and the stories they are reading, where they come from, but they also pay attention to how other cultures are portrayed. They also take note at how similar characters, settings, even plot lines vary across fantasy stories from different cultures. And by paying attention to these things, readers can learn more about their own and other cultures. I think it's important to say from the onset that all art and all literature does teach us something about the culture the text is coming from. And this is true in all texts that we read, and movies, and sometimes even music. What is especially interesting about looking at culture and fantasy stories is that since everything or anything can be made up in fantasy, including the way people dress, the words they use, the foods they eat, the homes they live in, and even the way they act, these books have a unique way of giving us a window into culture, whether this is our own culture or one that is new or less familiar to us. So, last thoughts, but of course, with an example. Let's try this with the book we know really well. We've already finished The Thief of Always, so this should be simple. And some of you may or may not have read Narnia or seen the movie, which kind of does connect. I think it helps to consider a culture if you know something about the author. I know that Clive Barker was born in England and lived there for almost 40 years before writing The Thief of Always. So we know he's English, the same as C.S. Lewis, the author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I know some things about English culture already and Western culture, which America's a part of. Let me think of some of those things, other things I can say I noticed or learned about the culture Clive Barker is writing from. One example would be holidays, and they are a part of the culture. And the holidays in the house does not, I'm so sorry. And the holidays the house does are not ones that every person does, like Halloween or Christmas. The holidays do let us know that culture of the book is firmly grounded in the West, and the facts of the holidays are so important to the children, so important that they are used as bait to lure the children in. Tells us a bit about the children's culture as well. Don't you think? Our culture is a little like that. We really care about holidays here in our culture. And maybe Clive Barker is perhaps sticking a little criticism too about our culture, because he might be saying that maybe holidays shouldn't be that important, that maybe regular old days should be valued more. I'm going to leave you with this. I challenge you to start looking deeper into the cultures you are seeing portrayed in the books you read.